15 people still missing. The agency says there are also more than 700,000 families, or over 3 million people affected by Ulysses, thousands of whom had to evacuate. Agricultural damage has reached at least 2.7 billion pesos, with Regions 3 and Calabarzon suffering close to 1 billion pesos in farm losses each. The estimated infrastructure damage from Ulysses stands at 5.2 billion pesos. Cagayan Valley and the Bicol region took the biggest hit from the typhoon and the destructive flood that followed. Budget Secretary Wendell Avisado says the executive branch is still studying the proposal to put the entire island of Luzon under a state of calamity. Avisado said they are still evaluating the budget needed for the proposal. He says that post-disaster response fund remains sufficient. This includes a 6.8 billion peso balance and a 10 billion peso additional fund.
Huwag po kayong mag-alala at ang inyong pong gobyerno ay meron pong sapat na pundo para po tugunan yung mga pangangailangan ninyo.
In Marikina City, residents are now cleaning up after last week's devastating flood. Piles of trash and swept furniture and appliances littered Barangay Malanday. According to Marikina Mayor Marcy Chodoro, the amount of garbage collected after Ulysses could be compared to 1 year's worth of the city's waste. MMDA personnel helped with the clearing operations. Thousands still pack against evacuation centers, and local authorities now fear that they might see a spike in COVID-19 cases due to the situation in their temporary shelters. Our correspondent Romel Lopez is on the ground to give us the updates. Romel, how is the situation there?
Yes, that's right, Boca. Thousands of residents here might be apprehensive to seek temporary refuge for fear of catching COVID-19. But their situation has left them with no choice but to stay in evacuation centers here in Cagayan. It has been days since Ulysses struck, but Mary Jane's residence in Tuguegarao is still buried in mud. She was forced to stay in this evacuation center.
Siyempre, mga sarili namin, unahin namin safety. Tapos hanggang sa pumunta po kami ng gym, pinadala po kami rito. Hanggang ngayon po, hindi pa kami makabalik dahil sa dami ng putik.
There are 3,000 others just like Mary Jane. They all have to sleep on the cold floors of the classrooms. But that's not all. They have to live with the fear of contracting COVID-19.
Tatakot ako, sir. Kaya hindi kami labas ng labas dyan, sir. Dito lang kami sa loob. Nakakatakot yung mga COVID, sir. Malay mo, kung may mga kakahalo mo dyan, may mga COVID.
With the minimum health protocols hardly observed by some evacuees, local officials are resigned to the difficulty of managing evacuation centers while there's a pandemic. To curb the possible transmission of the virus, only one family is assigned per classroom.
Ngayon kasi tapos na, medyo mababa na ngayon, minamarapat kong nasa bahay lang sila. Kasi medyo hirap ang sitwasyon dito.
Wash areas are also put up. Despite these precautionary measures, typhoon victims remain anxious.
Natatakot din po, kaso nga lang, sir, siyempre, lakasan na lang po ng loob. Ingat na lang din po sa sarili.
Cagayan Governor Manuel Mamba fears that there might be a spike in local cases.
Kahapon, I think tatlo lang o apat yata. But prior to that, medyo marami-rami. No, kaya sana huwag dumami ng husto.
To date, there are 886 confirmed infections in the province of Cagayan alone. 167 are active cases, while more than 700 have already recovered and 10 already died. The LGU is appealing for the procurement of masks and face shields. The LGU urged the residents to observe minimum health protocols. Officials said that their cooperation is very important. There's a bit of good news because the weather has improved quite a bit and the floodwaters continued to recede.
Romel Lopez reporting live from Cagayan. Experts weigh in on possible solutions to prevent severe flooding in Cagayan as more typhoons are expected to enter the country before the year ends. What proposals are on the drawing board? Well, Shala Francisco tells us.
The UP Resilience Institute believes that the protocols on the release of water from dams must be revisited. Its statement comes after the spilling operations in Magat Dam contributed in widespread flooding in Cagayan Valley.
Pag nagbigay ka ng release, dapat based on the science and based on the forecast, kailangan meron ka ng alam na how much level ang tubig that is to be expected.
Lagmay notes that several other factors may also have contributed to the massive flooding. Several experts are now studying the narrow areas in Cagayan River, particularly in Tupang, Alcala, and Lalio, called the Magapit Narrows.
Merong mga bato doon na mga old sedimentary rocks, no, na nakukonstrict yung river. So, ang mangyayari doon ay hindi makakalabas kaagad. So, pag hindi makalabas kaagad yung tubig, mag-iipon.
Despite having several components, Lagmay stresses that it all boils down to the lack of anticipation. He says additional flood sensors and specific hazard warning may help in future calamities.
It's very important that we do hazard-specific, area-focused, and time-bound warnings para pag nangyari, mangyayari talaga.
The National Irrigation Administration claims that it followed all existing protocols. Pagasa, for its part, is urging residents, particularly in typhoon-prone areas, to always prepare. 2 to 3 more typhoons are expected to enter the Philippine territory before the year ends. The Weather Bureau warns that the cyclones may hit the area still reeling from the recent calamities.
Tinutulak po ng mga high-pressure area itong mga bagyo. Kaya po sila mas nagla-landfall sa gitnang bahagi ng ating bansa, sa may Southern Luzon, Visayas, Northern Mindanao mainly.
The Environment Department has instructed its officials to look into the status of watershed areas.
Ang watershed very critical kasi ito yung dito nagde-drain yung water eh. Kasi pagka umulan diyan, dito nagde-drain. So kapag ang watershed mo highly vegetated or maganda ang vegetation, ibig sabihin yung watershed mo nakakapag-hold ng water.
The DENR adds that it has approved the dredging of Cagayan River to help solve bottleneck sites of flooding. The move also aims to improve the volume capacity of the river in times of intense rainfall. The agency says the provincial government of Cagayan is now looking for a project contractor. Shaila Francisco, WR1 News.
Magat Dam's management as well as other man-made factors might be the focus of a Senate probe on the flooding in several parts of Luzon. Senator Francis Kiko Pangilinan wants to look into the flooding in Cagayan Valley. Citing an InfraWatch report, Pangilinan said Magat Dam's gates were still closed 3 to 4 days prior to the typhoon's landfall. He said the dam should have released water 2 to 3 days before the typhoon. Pangilinan, who formerly chaired the National Irrigation Administration, said that protocols on dam discharge and flood warning should be followed. Senator Risa Ontiveros also filed a bill to investigate the man-made causes of the historic flooding in Cagayan, Rizal, and Marikina. The bill also aims to create a policy to better equip the country for future calamities. Meanwhile, in an interview with Radio 5, DOST Secretary Fortunato de la Peña attributed the flooding to overly saturated lands due to the series of typhoons and quarrying. De la Peña also cited siltation of the rivers as the reason for the flooding.
So, ang ating mga naririnig na mga rekomendasyon dyan attend to the restoration of what is given to us by nature. Parang ibinabalik sa atin kung ano yung ginagawa natin sa kalikasan.
We will go for a quick break. When the big story returns, the Presidential Electoral Tribunal deals former Senator Bongbong Marcos another blow. The tribunal rejected his motion seeking to boot out Associate Justice Leonen from his poll protest. And thousands of Converge subscribers complain of losing their internet connection. The reason for the service disruption, up next. Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. The SSS is offering calamity loans for members affected by Ulysses, but some have already availed of the loan at the onset of the pandemic. What other forms of assistance then are available for members? Let's find out in this report by Dale De Vera.
When Typhoon Ulysses ravaged most part of Luzon, Larazen's only priority was to save the lives of her loved ones. By the time the typhoon has unleashed its wrath, most of their belongings had been drenched in flood water, leaving their family with nothing but damaged items. Almost all of their appliances are now useless, and even their walls have been compromised. While Larazen is thankful that her family is alive, she couldn't help but worry about how her family can start over. Although loans will soon be available for those affected by the typhoon, Larazen has a problem. She already availed of a calamity loan the moment SSS announced its availability at the start of the pandemic.
Yun kasi yung importante ngayon talaga, yung papagawa namin ulit yung mga part ng bahay kasi talaga nasira talaga siya. Mga walls, talaga nagbukahan lahat.
But the State Pension Fund says Larazen does not need to worry as other options are available for those in similar situations. SSS Vice President for Corporate Communications Fernan Nicolas explains members may avail of 3 programs under calamity assistance depending on their situation. This includes a calamity loan worth as much as 20,000 pesos, an advanced payment of pension for pensioners, or a home repair loan. Under the advanced pension, a member may apply for a 3-month advance, meaning if an application gets approved in December, a pensioner will receive his January to March pension in one credit. Home repair loans meanwhile depend on the borrower's capacity to pay for repairs on properties ravaged by the typhoon. Should member borrowers have existing calamity loans, they may opt to file for a salary loan.
Kapag po hindi kayo qualified sa calamity, you can try our salary loan, which is much higher kasi ang calamity loan is only up to 20,000. Ang salary loan po is up to 40,000.
Aside from SSS, Pag-ibig Fund announced that it will also offer calamity loans to its members who have been affected by the recent typhoons. For News 5, Dale De Vera, We Are One News.
The palace says that not everybody in evacuation centers will be screened for COVID-19. Spokesman Harry Roque says antigen tests will be conducted in shelters, but those with symptoms will be prioritized. But Isabela Governor Rodito Albano said that they no longer have funds for mass testing in evacuation sites.
Hindi, wala kami pera para sa ganun. Mag-ano kami ng massive testing sa mga evacuation centers. Karamihan ng mga evacuation centers namin nalubog din. Pina-assess pa namin ito at nire-reorient at nire-redirect namin yung mga resources natin towards yung pa-upgrading ng mga rescue facilities sa mga evacuation centers.
Sketches of flood-resilient houses have been proposed way back in 2009 after Tropical Storm Ondoy hit. And with Ulysses displacing millions, these proposals are once again being floated. But can the ordinary Filipino afford such structures? Camille Samonte tells us.
From houses on stilts to flood escape stairs, these sketches have been around since 2009, right after Ondoy denuded a huge part of Metro Manila, especially Marikina. Environmental planner Paulo Alcazaren is the mastermind behind these flood-resilient houses and barangay centers. 11 years later, his designs remain relevant after Typhoon Ulysses ravaged a huge swathe of Luzon, leaving around 40,000 houses damaged. To aid in rescue and evacuation, he suggests flood escape stairs, something that could have benefited those hit by Typhoon Yolanda in Tacloban.
A lot of people would have been saved from yung storm surge sa Tacloban kung yung buildings nila had a place at the top na pwede nilang puntahan to evade the very fast high-rising floodwaters, which is something similar that would be done sa Cagayan Provident village, no?
He also designed barangay centers with at least 4 floors to rise above the flood line. For subdivisions, guard houses must be equipped with rubber boats, life vests, and warning flags should a flash flood occur. This might help the likes of Joseph Lado, who lives near Marikina River. But with hardly anything to make ends meet, he says they have no budget to do renovation works.
Kung may project naman ng gobyerno dyan, di bakit hindi? Sila na lang magpapagawa. Kami, wala naman, di nga makalipat ng bahay. Di nga mapapunta yun sa second floor eh.
Alcazarin believes the same. He said government should allot a budget and commit to building flood-resilient infrastructures. He adds that massive flooding will also never be solved if the government will not address the bigger problem, the country's poor urban planning and the lack of affordable, well-built housing.
Well, this happens every year, right? So nakikita natin, nangyayari natin, so paulit-ulit na lang to. So saan nga yung problema? Yung problema ay dahil nga pagbaba ng tubig at pag nawala na at sumikat ng araw, nakakalimutan natin yung problema.
For News 5, Camille Samonte, we are One News.
These are the other big stories today. The Supreme Court has junked the motion seeking to keep Associate Justice Leonen out of the proceedings for the vice presidential electoral protest lodged by former Senator Bongbong Marcos. The High Court, sitting as the Presidential Electoral Tribunal, voted unanimously to deny the separate motions filed by Marcos and Solicitor General Jose Calida. The Supreme Court is also seeking an explanation from Calida and Manila Times reporter Jomar Canlas on why they should not be cited for contempt. Calida and Marcos's motions both cited a report by Canlas to prove Leonen's alleged bias. Cebu City Congressman Raul Del Mar has died at the age of 79. His staff at the lower house confirmed today. Del Mar's family did not give any further details on his passing. His colleagues, including House Speaker Lord Alan Velasco, have extended their condolences. Del Mar represented Cebu's 1st District for 9 terms since 1987. Malacanang has rejected calls for an academic freeze despite the spate of typhoons and the COVID-19 pandemic. Spokesman Harry Roque argued that typhoons should not impact education since classes are mostly held online. The Commission on Higher Education proposes instead to extend the semester by another week or 2. An official of the University of the Philippines also said that it is unlikely for them to suspend the entire semester despite the clamor from students and fellow teachers. UP is on a recovery break until November 21. Converge ICT subscribers complain of having no internet access Tuesday afternoon. Converge trended on Twitter with thousands of complaints aired on the social media platform. In a statement, Converge said power-related issues compromised its services. The internet provider announced that services in North and Central Luzon have already been restored as of 6:13 p.m., while NCR and Southern Luzon customers will have to wait for the remainder of the evening. Let's pause for a quick break, and when we come back, let's take a look at Moderna's vaccine and how it stands out from the other experimental vaccines being developed. And Pfizer now moves on to testing the delivery of their shots in the hopes of overcoming storage challenges. The details up next. Good evening. You're still watching The Big Story. Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine showed promise in its initial tests, sparking optimism worldwide. Now, another U.S. company, Moderna, is looking to make headway in the vaccine race. Still, local health officials urge the public to take the developments with a grain of salt. Greg Gregoria with the story.
American biotech company Moderna reports a 94.5% efficacy rate for its vaccine candidate. The firm has 30,000 trial participants in its ongoing phase 3 clinical trials in the United States. The preliminary results are based on the 95 volunteers from the trials who tested positive with COVID-19 weeks after the second dose of vaccine were given to participants. 90 of them were put in the placebo group, while 5 received the vaccine being developed. There were 11 participants who fell severely ill, all of whom were from the placebo group. The early trial results, according to Moderna, show how effective their vaccine is against COVID-19 infection. Moderna uses a new platform called messenger RNA, which is faster to produce than traditional vaccines. Back home, a member of the Health Department's Technical Advisory Group expresses reservations, saying it is still important to wait for the full trial results.
There's no way to tell. Kasi unang-una, bagong-bago tong platform na to. No, we don't even have a real world basis to compare the performance of these vaccines against.
Pfizer and BioNTech, which earlier reported a more than 90% efficacy rate, are using the same platform. Aside from these drug makers, Russia's Gamaleya also claims that its Sputnik V vaccine is 92% effective, based on early trial results. All of these vaccine candidates have different storage temperature requirements. Moderna's vaccine remains stable at a regular refrigerator temperature for a month. It requires -20 degrees Celsius for a 6-month storage. Lim says this storage requirement is achievable in the Philippines.
Kailangan pa rin ng freezing, no? And from what Moderna has released, from that frozen storage requirement, kung kailangan mo na siyang i-transfer to point-of-care facilities, yun na yung ref temps at 1 month. No? So of course, pag naririnig natin yan, nakakabuhay ng loob kasi at least yung ganyang klaseng mga storage requirements, achievable yan sa Pilipinas.
The DOH earlier admitted that there are no ultra-low freezers in government facilities. Thus, the storage facility is indeed a challenge. Vaccine SAR Secretary Carlito Galvez says the government will consider all complexities of a certain vaccine prior to procurement, including storage requirement and cost effectiveness. For News 5, Greg Gregorio, we are One News.
The spread of COVID-19 in the country is slowing down. Using data from November 9 to November 15, the Octa research team said the reproduction number, or R0 level of COVID-19 in the country, slid further to 0.81 from 0.87. The lower reproduction number, which is well below 1, shows that the spread of the virus is further slowing down. Octa research also reported that the positivity rate of Metro Manila has dropped to 4%. Well within the WHO's recommended threshold of below 5%. Meanwhile, civil society groups are warning that the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, might hamper the country's procurement of COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. The group says the trade pact increases protection of intellectual property rights, which could either make it more difficult for a vaccine to enter the Philippines or push up the prices higher.
Pero dito lamang sa usapin ng anti-COVID-19 vaccine, nakikita na natin na iiral ang impluwensya ng the powerful developed countries na merong access at merong mga resources ay halos mako-corner nila most of the vaccines. At ano na yun, what will happen to the rest?
Pfizer has launched a pilot delivery program for its COVID-19 vaccine candidate in the U.S. The American pharmaceutical company seeks to address distribution challenges facing its ultra-cold storage requirements. The shots must be stored at -94 degrees Fahrenheit or -70 degrees Celsius, significantly way below the standard for other vaccines. The pilot delivery program for the experimental COVID-19 vaccines covers the states of Rhode Island, Texas, Mexico, or maybe that's New Mexico, and Tennessee. But the company clarifies that 4 states will not receive vaccine doses earlier than the other states, and that the plan is merely a delivery test run. Pfizer hopes the delivery trial would serve as a model for other states once the vaccine gets approved for mass use. One common denominator between Pfizer and Moderna's vaccine is their use of messenger RNA. But what exactly is this code and how does it help the body fight SARS-CoV-2? Let's watch this. And that wraps up today's big story. Catch us again tomorrow at 8 p.m. on Signal, Channels 8 and 250. Please like our Facebook page, One News. For more in-depth analysis, visit our webpage, onenews.ph. I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News. Good evening.